Allix joined the GTM Research Reserve as the spatial ecologist in July of 2020. She holds a UAV or unmanned aerial vehicle pilot's license and is a certified prescribed burn manager. Her career interest is to use UAVs to create high resolution aerial imagery that can be used to monitor ecological change over time, along with using active management through prescribed fire to restore Florida's uniquely pyrogenic ecosystem. Allix holds a bachelor's in natural resource conservation with a minor in wildlife ecology from the University of Florida's School of Forest Resources and Conservation. She also obtained 2 master's certificates from UF in geospatial analysis and unmanned air systems mapping. So Allix, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I think it's all set up now. I've requested control and everybody can hear me all right. All right.
We can hear and see you.
Fantastic. Now I got to see if I can get control. Might be delayed.
If you click on your screen, you should be able to take access. There you go.
All right. So today I'll be talking about developing areas of interest for habitat mapping and change detection within the GTM Research Reserve through the use of unmanned or unoccupied aerial vehicles. They have transitioning from unmanned. So our areas of interest include oysters, saltmarsh mangrove ecosystems, dune and beach structure, fire-dependent ecosystems. And we decided upon these particular areas of interest because we can start with current and historic survey sites and use in situ data to compare UAV data to. First off, we'll start with oyster monitoring regions. We have them broken into 7 locations. This is based off of the research department. Within those oyster monitoring regions, we have 4 primary sites, Pellicer Flats, the Guana River, Salt Run, and Devil's Elbow. And as you can see in each of those, there are monitoring sites at the pink dots and other oyster bars in the green. So this location is actually within the Northeast Aquatic Preserve. It is a monitoring site and restoration site for University of Florida at Gothinsville Park. We've started working over here just to keep an eye on what you see is the vegetation starting to grow back now that they've started to place these oyster restoration project site locations. And this is a hard break wall that you can see right here. So originally there wasn't a lot of vegetation. And so what we're doing is we're actually monitoring this vegetation change based off of these oyster monitoring sites. Next sites, we're looking at Saltmarsh and Mangrove regions, same 7 regions initially. And we're looking at 4 primary sites. So in Pellicer Creek, one of the unique things is this site also has 3 swamp-based transects. So the swamp program that was mentioned earlier in the day, there are 3 transects. So you have the upper, the middle, and the lower site. This is also going to be part of a Science Collaborative Catalyst project. So it's a 1-year project that implements the collaboration between 5 research reserves and Duke University to see about applying UAVs within the swamp system to collect aerial data and hopefully eventually the biomonitoring of those sites. Within the Talamato River, to give you a reference, now that everybody knows where Big Mama is, that is this site down here at the bottom. And then all the way at the north end, you also have a veg monitoring site. For Fort Matanzas, this is the Fort Matanzas or North Matanzas site for the trees that are being monitored within wet feet. And then for Butler Beach, you also have tree sites down on the southern part and another site for veg monitoring on the northern end. Within this slide, you'll notice that on the left-hand side, this is an aerial image of the location where Big Mama is at, on the peninsula of the Guana Preserve. And I flew this at 400 feet. This is mud flats, and I collected this imagery during low tide at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was cloudy. So that's why everything looks gray. It's not because it's necessarily mucky and dirty and contaminated. It's because there was 100% cloud cover at the time. And that was selected because at 2:30 in the afternoon, if I did this under normal full light, all you would see is a lot of washout. And then on the right-hand side, this is a digital elevation model of that same location. So you can see the tributaries that match up and then into the uplands around it. Within the same location, they have individual monitoring plots, and you'll be able to see, if you have full screen, there are 4 different white PVC pipes that denote the 10-meter square location. And as you can see, it was flown at 15 meters in altitude, and there would be using it to look at a vegetation percent cover. For the dune and beach structure, for reference, the image on the right-hand side is directly across the street from the Exxon gas station, just next to the education center of GTM. So for folks that are familiar, that's where this beach image was collected. And the image on the left is of the dune structure within GTM on the beach. Just recently, as of last week, the beaches division within ORCP has requested assistance to conduct a pilot project of this same flight location, but it's going to be 2 miles long, 300 feet wide. And we're going to create 3D models of the beach, which is about 70 acres of beach. So when they do the sand placement project coming up in the summertime, we have comparison data. We'll have a pre-flight 3D model and a post-flight 3D model, and that'll be about flown at 200 feet and about a 1/2-inch pixel resolution. For fire-dependent communities and ecosystem monitoring, reference the image on your right is actually the location where the mouse cursor is at. That's a purple and then the brown color. So you have a freshwater marsh with a uplands strand right through the middle of it. This freshwater marsh, because it's fire dependent, it'll burn roughly every 2 to 3 years is its recommendation. And this imagery was taken so we can begin comparing vegetation change over time. And hopefully here in the next month or so, we'll have updated imagery and this will be all burned over and, for the next image. So monitoring regimes of these areas of interest. Conveniently, they're unique amongst them to make it a little bit easier for scheduling. So for oysters, we would be doing it in fall and winter during low tide events. Saltmarsh mangrove ecosystems, we'll be doing them in spring and fall. Shooting for low tide events. The dune and beach structures would be before and after natural and anthropogenic disturbances, and same with the fire dependent ecosystems, before and after natural and or the anthropogenic. So you can consider, a prescribed fire as, partially anthropogenic, partially natural, because they're naturally supposed to burn, and we're just implementing that operation to prevent wildfires. So frequency, the plan is to start out with annual flights for oysters, and then to be determined when it comes to long-term monitoring. So we're still unsure. This is a new program, and we're just now getting our feet wet in this project. For Saltmarsh mangrove ecosystems, same thing. We're going to start out with a biannual flights, and then to be determined for long-term monitoring. Dune and beach structures, we're going to create baseline flights, such as the Beach Nourishment Project across from the Education Center office. And then it'll be disturbance dependent. And then we have our fire dependent ecosystems. We'll have baseline flights, such as the one that I just presented. And it will also be disturbance dependent. So for oysters, what are we going to collect, or what are we trying to look for? So you have 2D and 3D products, area, volume, and reef height. And questions for consideration are how much of the footprint of a reef changes, conditions of surrounding habitat, ecosystem services, and eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, the St. Augustine area hydrodynamics from this imagery. For the Saltmarsh mangroves, we're going to be looking at biomass monitoring and ecosystem change or marsh migration. The beach and dune structure will be 3D modeling for erosion and accretion, and fire-dependent ecosystems or vegetation change over time. Thank you. Image collection, you have your ground distance sampling as a measure of detail, and we don't know. When we're looking at, can you have too high of detail where it just becomes unproductive? And then your flight heights will produces the best ground sampling distance. Your repeatability of these flights through apps, tide level, collecting during low tides. Other considerations are sun angle, cloud cover, your payload type. So are you going to use a regular, digital camera, or are you going to use multispectral, which has in this situation, we're going to be working with 5 different bands and going into the red edge and near infrared. And then camera settings, so any number of parameters you can adjust on there. Classifying imagery, you have your automated, semi-automated, hybrid, supervised, and then a heads-up digitizations. So this image here, it was a supervised classification. On the image on the left is a pre-burn. The image on the right is post-prescribed fire. This is about 46 acres to give you a reference. And then this is just one run through of a supervised classification where it was trying to predict burned versus unburned areas. There's still quite a bit of error. Like I said, it was its first run. They tried to pick up some of this open water that is in the image within this swamp as burned area. So the green is burned, the orange is unburned, and then the pink is just void for that image area. So we ask why UAVs. So their flexibility. Satellites and airplanes are not always available post-disturbance. The ability to select optimal conditions for image collection, such as low tides. Your frequency, so the repeatable flights at specific intervals. It's a non-invasive way of monitoring. So you saw with a lot of the wet feet sites, there's this, human trail that creates its own hydrological impacts. Can we collect data using UAVs and minimize the impact of us walking through the marsh? And then, of course, cost. So tasking a satellite for contracting an airplane can be quite expensive. But there are limitations to the drones, batteries and area covered. So those are some of our limitations. And I appreciate your time. Any questions? I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for sharing that presentation, Allix. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise during State of the Reserve. I see one question in the chat box so far. Will flights be just within the GTM Research Reserve boundaries?
Currently, at this time, because of our NEPA requirements, working with NOAA and UNF, yes, they're only occurring within the boundary of the GTM.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions for Allix? Do we have anyone who wants to come off of mute and or raise their virtual hand and ask a question? Steph, I see your hand is raised.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't so much have a question as that NOAA NEPA doesn't mean that we can't use the UAVs outside of the boundary. We just have to consider that in the NEPA when we do it. So tiny clarifying point.
Thanks, Steph. Kelly Smith, I saw your hand was raised, but it is not anymore. Do you still have a question?
That's because I can't figure out the whole hand raising thing. So I think I didn't know if it was raised or not. But yeah, so this gets to that whole NOAA NEPA and thinking about the aquatic preserves and whether flights would be conducted up in the northern aquatic preserves and some of those other areas for oysters and other substrates.
Yeah, I mean, we would just have to write another, NEPA document. And I saw a question that says, what is NEPA? So it's the National Environmental Policy Act. And it basically allows, in this situation, we have maps and documentation that explains how we're going to go about mitigating disturbances to the endangered, imperiled species that we could be flying around or near or over during our work. So yes, they can be written in, and we have a good solid layout and design right now. So it's just a matter of adjusting accordingly to other locations.
Thank you, Allix, for that clarification.